that God promised them. They have Ishmael to begin with. You see, what God's plan was God wanted Sarah and Abraham to bring forth this child. But you see, out of their lack of faith and discernment, you see how that Sarah begins to look at the fact that she's 90 years old. How can I possibly be able to have a child at 90 years old? We read where the Bible tells us that at one point that it caused Sarah to laugh. I'm telling you here this morning, I can't imagine it would make me laugh if somebody was to say that a 90-year-old grandma was going to give birth to a baby. Come on now, folks, you do good to even hold a baby at 90 years old, much less conceive a child. Can you imagine? Childbirth, child labor at 90 years old. And I believe that Sarah probably felt the same thing. And so she began to think within herself, I'm going to help God out. And I'm going to talk to Hagar. And we're going to have that promised son that God has promised us. But I want you to understand this morning, that was not at all what God had planned for them. As a matter of fact, what God's plan was for that 90-year-old grandma Sarah to give birth to a promised son by the name of Isaac. And so we see that this name, Ishmael, it means to be the child of the flesh. If you do a little study, you'll understand that this child of the flesh was a child of the flesh because they got out of the will of God and they had that child through the flesh. Amen. Ishmael, being the child of the flesh, was because of Abraham's decision in trying to bring forth a promised son out of the way that God desired to do it. And just like Ishmael's name meant a child of the flesh, Isaac's name meant a child of the Spirit, or a child of the promise. You see, Isaac, however, was the son in which God was going to bring that promise. Therefore, he was considered to be that child of the Spirit. You know, I feel like it's kind of strange when I think about it, because there's a conflict going on in the house of Abraham, and it begins to cause contention to be between Hagar and Sarah, because now we see that Isaac, the child of the Spirit, has been born into the house of Abraham. Now you got the child of the flesh and you got the child of the Spirit living in the same household. They're trying to get along in the same household. And I can imagine that Abraham's seed was supposed to be a seed that would inherit the promises, that seed that would inherit Daddy's inheritance. And so I know that there was a daily struggle in that house of Abraham as to who it was that was going to inherit the inheritance of Abraham. After all, he's way up in his age now, and it probably won't be very many years from now that Abraham's going to die, and somebody's going to take the throne, amen, of Abraham, or somebody's going to take, amen, that fatherly role. Somebody's going to take the mantle of Abraham. And so Sarah begins to realize, amen, that son Isaac is supposed to be the one that is going to inherit the promises. It's not going to be Ishmael. And so she despises the very thought that Ishmael is in the house. She despises the idea that Ishmael and his mother may even begin to contemplate that one day that they would take on Abraham's inheritance. Can you imagine the conflict and the turmoil as Sarah begins to walk by Hagar? She won't even as much as look at her. Hagar don't want nothing to do with Sarah, because they realize what's at stake for their son. You see, Hagar loved her son Ishmael, and I believe that she would look out for him no matter what. Whether Sarah liked it or not, she would stand up for Ishmael. And so it was with Sarah. Sarah began to look at this son. Not only did God promise this son, not only is he the promised child, but do you realize that at 90 years old, God gave me a miracle. At 90 years old, I conceived a child. And you're not about to take away what has been, amen, given or to be inherited by my son. I can tell you this morning that it amazes me that Sarah is getting to the point that she's aggravated. She despises Hagar because of the fact that Ishmael has been born. After all, I find it strange because it is Hagar or Sarah's fault in the first place, but she's the one that encouraged that thing to take place in the first place. So what are you saying, Pastor Myers? What I'm telling you is it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Amen. Sarah tells Hagar and Abraham to conceive a child, and now she can't stand the child. She tells him to have a child, and now she despises the fact that Ishmael even lives in the house. You see, I'm telling you, sometimes this ain't what I'm preaching, but sometimes we make decisions on our own, and to our own demise, we despise the decision that we made because it got in the way of God's plan. Can somebody say amen to me this morning? You see, that child of the flesh and the child of the spirit, they can no longer dwell in the same household. Sarah finally got to the place that Sarah said, I cannot take this anymore. Sarah says, I've dealt with it until I'm sick of it. Anybody ever done this before? I'm up to here. Any of you mamas ever told your children, I'm up to here. I'm up to my eyeballs. I can't take it no more. I've dealt with all that I'm going to deal with. You see, Sarah came to a place in her life that some of us have been at. It is a breaking point. I can't deal with this anymore. He has got to go. Amen. Abraham, that child has got to go. That mother's got to go. The child of the spirit and the child of the flesh can no longer live in the same household. There's too much turmoil. There's too much contention. There's too much rigmarole. She has got to go. So the man of God consults God, and God says, don't worry about it. Listen to your wife, Sarah. I promised that Abraham, I promised you Isaac, and Isaac will be the inheritance. So she has got to go. I'm still going to bless Ishmael. I'm still going to help Ishmael. Some of you already know where I'm going with some of this. You see, we have a battle with the flesh, the child of the flesh, and the child of the spirit. And every last one of you is an Isaac and an Ishmael. Every last one of us, we battle every single day. And you know what God was saying? God is looking at the situation, and God says, if the Spirit is going to prevail, if the Spirit is going to rise up, if the Spirit is going to inherit the promises, the flesh has got to go. That child of the flesh has got to go. Can I tell you this morning? That's what God's telling us as a church. There is a tug of war that is taking place in every last one of us. And sometimes you got to talk to your own flesh. Sometimes you got to put that flesh on the altar and say, somebody has got to go.
Preach, amen.
So there is a tug of war in the house of Abraham.
Amen.
Amen. Back and forth. Amen. I want to demonstrate to you the same way that it is for you and I every day. You see, Sister Debbie represents us. And Brother David, you represent the enemy and the flesh. And it's always pulling back at us.